listening to the Small Town Queer podcast produced by Tweed Regional Museum in northern New South Wales, Australia. Follow us as we uncover and explore Tweed's rich queer history from the early 1900s to the present. The museum has collaborated with LGBTQIA+ community members to collect, share and preserve the histories of Tweed's many and varied queer voices. We wish to recognise the generations of local Aboriginal people of the Bundjalung Nation who are the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we are recording this podcast today. My name is Emma Shield.
And my name is Erika Taylor, and we are the curators of the Small Town Queer digital project and exhibition.
Hello, on today's podcast we're talking to local couple Peter Waters and Pete Daly. Peter Waters is a lawyer specialising in telecommunications and competition law, and Peter Daly is an occupational therapist. The couple resides on a farm near the Tweed coast. In 2017, they spearheaded and helped to fund one of the most successful regionally based Yes campaigns in Australia. The electorate of Richmond, which includes Tweed Shire, expressed an above average yes vote of 67.9%. As a result, the Australian Marriage Act of 1961 was updated on the 9th of December 2017 to allow for marriage equality. Welcome, Peter and Pete. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks.
Thank you.
We're starting all of our podcast episodes by asking our interviewees, how do you identify as a small town queer? Peter?
Well, I suppose I was a small town queer before I knew it, because I grew up in Lismore, and of course in those days there were no reference points, no talk other than in derogatory statements about being queer.
Right.
And I probably escaping the town was part of finding my identity as a queer person.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to go to a city, in fact I had to go to another country to find that for myself.
Really? And where did you find yourself?
I went to the US,
Okay.
and I sort of made a resolution to myself that when I stepped off the plane I would begin being gay.
Right.
And I would live that life openly, and I built sort of the courage and the patterns of behaviour to then be able to come back and step off the plane here and do the same thing.
And what about you, Pete?
I guess for me, it's hard when you think about yourself as something where that begins and ends. I grew up in the very inner city of Melbourne, and I guess I always knew to some degree I was a gay man, and that just became a part of who I was. And as I've become an older person, it's not sort of the first thing I think of about myself. I'm me,
Yeah.
but certainly it's a very large part of me, and it's a part of me of which I'm very proud. And you know, living in a big city, there's great opportunities to live that and express that. I moved to Murwillumbah for a lifestyle change, and it's funny because I never, by that stage of my life, I guess it had become less a focus of who I was and just a part of who I was, and so living in a small town made no difference really. Generally, I'd say it's been a great experience as a gay man living in a small town. The marriage equality debate changed that a bit, but we'll get to that, I guess. But yeah, I identify myself as a small town queer gay man living in a great rural community.
Great, thank you for sharing that with us. So why did you move to the Tweed Shire? I know, Pete, you just told us a little bit about it being a lifestyle change for you. Was that all it was, or?
I guess so. I'd been visiting here for many years, visiting friends who lived here, and for about 20 years it was one of those things I was always going to do. Mm-hmm. And then I just did it. And so, yeah, I think I didn't think about it a lot. I moved to Murwillumbah, and I lived in Murwillumbah for many years, and it was a great thing in my life.
Wonderful, so no regrets?
No, none at all.
And Peter?
Well, the presenting reason was that I was towards the end of my career. I'd worked really hard. I wanted a change in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And my mother lived here and she needed some support and care. So
Mm-hmm.
I decided I'd move back. But I suppose the more I think about it, I sort of escaped here to find my identity, but part of the beauty and the life that you have here remained part of me.
Right.
In a way, and it took a long time to recognise that, and I was very glad to have done that. I initially lived down towards Byron, and then Peter and I met, and I moved up here to Tweed, which was ironic because when I was in Lismore, we used to always have to come on trips. The Lismore High and Murwillumbah High have annual trips where they go on sport and debating and everything, and I used to have to come to Murwillumbah, and I was always terrified of the kids in Murwillumbah.
All the inter-school activities.
That's right, because the kids in Murwillumbah always seemed tougher. But,
really?
Yes. but yeah, so it was funny to be back here.
And how has this experience been compared with living in the city, Pete?
It's interesting for me because I always identified the city as the big cosmopolitan place where people were probably broader in their thinking. And when I moved here, it probably was a concern somewhere in my mind. Mm-hmm. Friends who lived here were gay and lesbian people, so I probably looked to them a bit. But in truth, the interesting thing for me is it had never been an issue. And in fact, when I reflect, living in a city, I came across more challenges in regards to homophobia than I ever have living in a small town in the country.
That's very interesting because I think a lot of people would assume it's the other way around.
Yeah, and I would have too.
Mm. Yeah. Did you want to say anything else, Peter?
Yes, I think when I've lived in Sydney and a number of places overseas, and much of that life and much of me was defined by work. And so why I enjoy the experience here is that your life is defined much more by your relationships. And if I start to talk about work and what I do in Sydney, people sort of tend to roll their eyes and move on.
Yes.
So it's nice to have your life defined by something richer than just the experience of work.
Than what you do work-wise or what suburb you might live in the city.
And we have a wonderful group of friends here.
So when you moved here, you said there were some people here already from the rainbow community that you knew of. Have you met more people? Do you feel a sense of community? A community within a community, for example? With our research, we've certainly found that some of the people that we've spoken to thought they were literally the only gay in the village, but maybe through joining online groups, they've come to discover there are other people who identify as queer in the community. Did you find that, or did you find that you had to create that for yourself?
I'll answer that. First, when I moved up here, the people that I did know here who were from the rainbow community, they were couples, and I was single at the time. So I made a little pledge to myself to say no to any invitation, and that did open up some opportunities. I go to gay and lesbian things, like tropical fruits events and nights and things, and try and meet people that way. And I did make friends, and I don't know, maybe we just spot each other in the street, but in town we've met other couples and become friends with them over time. But it is a sort of community within a community, but in the living of it's not necessarily that we keep to a ghetto. It's really that we're all just socialising together and being together, and we just happen to be gay and lesbian people. But it is nice to know that there is strength in numbers in that community within the community, and that you are part of something else.
And I guess you might have had to draw on that community when we did come to the marriage equality campaign. Did you find that you relied on that network, or you had to build that network? And maybe if you could introduce to us how you came to be involved in the local Yes campaign. Peter?
It's sort of a complex answer because compared to growing up as a teenager in Lismore, living now here in this community where our group includes gay and straight people, and it's just part of living the everyday experience. Yes. That's such a stark contrast. But when it came to the marriage equality campaign, in some ways it re-exposed the fears that all gay people have about how they will be perceived, how people will respond to them. Mm-hmm. And so there wasn't a sort of a rising up of the queer community in the Tweed Valley to actually campaign for marriage equality. In some ways it was the opposite. People were fearful that what they had gained through the way they lived their ordinary lives, and that the acceptance which they saw on a person-to-person level might somehow vanish in the sharp political debate that was going on.
Right.
And so many queer people actually didn't step up because they were fearful of a return to a less benign, a more hateful environment.
Right.
And so in some ways we had to build it from scratch, and sometimes you felt awfully alone in what you were doing.
Right. And I'm sure it's quite hard because there is an expectation to be an activist because the community has always had to fight for what it has, for services and for rights, for its rights. So how did you contact and mobilise the queer and allied community, local community, to join the campaign? And what strategies did you implement to also maybe garner the support of the wider voting community
I
of
suppose
Richmond?
a lot of the focus of the campaign was on reminding the wider community, because at the end of the day, they are the ones that had to vote in the majority for this to happen.
Yes.
And so much of the campaign and the way we approached it was reminding people, the wider community, that gay people live amongst them. You know, we had an advertisement, which I think was the most effective, which said, you know, we are your brothers, your sisters, your employees, your employers. You know, we're here in this community and we want you to recognise us. And so that was very much the focus of how we advertised and pushed the campaign here in the Tweed.
And can you tell us a little bit more, maybe for the listeners who haven't read the article that covers the campaign on the Small Town Queer website, what were some of the campaign strategies and activities that you implemented to get people's attention and make them realise that this is a human rights issue as well as a local issue? It's not just an issue for LGBTQI plus people to be concerned about.
So a lot of it was just sort of putting the message out there publicly. We had some great sort of courageous allies who allowed that to happen. We managed to get a banner put across the road, both at Tweed Heads and here in town, that the council puts up, allows banners to be put up. And there was a fantastic younger woman in Tweed Council who made sure that happened.
Great.
And she was great. We took out advertisements in the newspaper, put up signs screen signs at the cinema, those sorts of things. We even put up on our own farm a big yes sign on the hill made out of fairy lights, so that when you were driving down Clothers Creek Road, you'd see it there. We tried other things that weren't so successful, and did make you feel it was going to be a failure, that it wasn't going to get traction. Another campaigner and I went around all the shops in town and knocked on everyone's door and wanted to put up, asked them to put up a sign. Other than just a few locations, the standard response was either they didn't support the case, but most of them it was, look, I do really support you, but if I put this sign up, I'm worried somebody will throw a rock through my window. And when you go up and down the main street and that's the response you get, it's very dispiriting.
I bet.
Peter was actively involved at a national level. And there's times when I wonder what it would have been like here if Peter hadn't brought that energy to town. Because I think I was quite brave at the time, but I was brave because I had strength behind me. And I had no questions about living in a small town and how it might be, but I think the surprise for me was when we were doing these things and hearing people say, look, I'm worried about rocks through the window, that was the town I was living in, that this was being set in. And, we also had a stall in a park during the weekend markets and things, and we had some good responses and we had just a few negative responses. They weren't pleasant. But it just was a surprise. So I think it shook me probably more than it shook Peter. It didn't shake me insofar as I didn't want to stand up and be seen, but rather I was cranky at the town I lived in at the time. But there were just smaller bits too. Like we had posters up in our windows at home, and you didn't see that around town. Whereas I would visit Melbourne and. Some of the suburbs, every house would have one in the window. And in Sydney, I know it was similar. And I'd just be disappointed sometimes there wasn't great representation. But I would talk to friends about that, and they would say, gee, I didn't think of it because I didn't think it was necessary. for them, they'd say, well, we're going to make this happen. You know, don't need to put posters up. So that's fair enough. I think you didn't mention that we had the shop front in town that we put signs up in. But as hard as that could be at times, there were just funny little moments where you'd be buoyed, like the person at the Tweed Council who really pushed to make that happen, the woman who printed the big banners for us. I don't know, was she on the Gold Coast?
Yeah, she's on the Gold Coast, and I tried a number of places to get the banner printed and they wouldn't print them. But she was just fantastic. She said, oh, I'll do it for nothing.
That's
and,
great.
And she printed up the banners, and so there were things like that.
And that
definitely.
kept you going to the next activity, the next...
Well, you know, when you're cranky and someone does something that's positive, you think, okay, look, this is good stuff.
There was this whole national campaign going on in the background, and there were points where there was a real concern that the Yes campaign might not get more than 50% overall. And so there was more of a resurgence nationally with phone calls and things like that, people trying very desperately to reach out to families and friends whilst you're running this local campaign. And I understand that there were times where you felt dispirited, but you kept going. And remarkably, it was a very, very successful campaign. The Richmond electorate, for which Tweed Shire is placed within, actually received an above average national postal vote of 67.9%. So how did it feel, A, knowing that the Yes campaign was successful, but also looking at how well Richmond had turned out for Yes votes?
Well, it was very affirming and surprising. It was surprising that it was so high because the campaign...
You weren't expecting it?
No, given on what it was like to go through the campaign. And also, you know, there was that sort of building ugliness at the national level.
Yes.
That
some fear-mongering, really, and trying
was.
to connect marriage equality to a whole host of other issues.
And the way that some politicians sort of invoked that sort of the sense of ugliness that was growing. So, and the campaign went on so long, and it was very distressing to a lot of queer people over that period of time as the rhetoric got uglier and uglier. So then to have that day, I remember it because I was in Sydney, and basically everybody in my law firm turned out to watch the result. And it was just fantastic. It was really fantastic. And then to see that Richmond got such a high vote, you sort of walked down the street and you kept thinking, you know, 7 out of 10 of you actually did this. And it was very affirming.
Wonderful. And Pete, when you think about that and what you were saying earlier about not being sure, like, what town do I live in, when you were sometimes receiving those negative reactions or maybe less than enthusiastic reactions to the campaign, but then to realise actually Richmond did turn out and voted above average for Yes.
Yeah, you know, that was a great thing. I think it was a surprise. The figure was a surprise, but a good surprise. It's hard to remember the feelings at the time, to look back and remember. I think part of it too, as you mentioned, about the discussion had become about other issues. One of the big other issues was the children of gay and lesbian people, and I have 2 children who live with their mums. And you think what happens to them, you think what happens to yourself if this is a bad outcome. And what does it mean to live in a country where you're kind of not celebrated or you're not acknowledged to have equality? And thankfully we didn't have to deal with that. But they were the sort of background feelings. I do remember during the lead up to it, you know, we met with other groups of people, and they weren't just gay and lesbian people, there were also groups of heterosexual and other people in the community who supported the cause. And, you know, within that, people just kept saying to each other, look after each other, look after yourself and look after each other. So that was good. That was the community within the community. And it's only when you sit down and reflect, you remember, wow, but we got through it. And it was a great outcome. And I say it's a great reflection of Australia.
Yes.
I went to a sort of queer conference, international queer conference. At the beginning of the conference, the organisers asked the Irish and the Australians to stand up. And she said, you are the only 2 countries in the world where people by popular vote voted to support queer people. And all the others were through either a court or a parliament. But, you know, in Australia and Ireland, it was achieved through mass popular support.
That's right.
And, you know, that is something. That is something to be really proud of. But then when I see Malcolm Turnbull put it down as his greatest achievement in office, I still have to grind my teeth of what it put everyone through. And for him to regard it as a great triumph of his disregards the terrible pain that it caused.
Well, he deferred that decision, didn't he, to, you know, a referendum, the vote of the people, but he didn't need to do that.
No.
And as you say, when you think back, you actually went through an awful ordeal, as did a lot of queer people, and it was quite shocking, I would imagine, for younger queer people to think, are my rights really on the table to be discussed? Am I going to be examined in this way?
Yeah. Well, the Irish had a great ad that we saw where a heterosexual couple ran around to all the neighbourhood knocking on the doors saying, we're just here to ask you if we could get married. And, you know, it was a good turning of the tables about what it was like for us. Like, why do we have to ask for this permission to be who we are?
People, as you say, they grin and bear it, they got on with their campaign, even though many people felt like this is not, we shouldn't have to be doing this. This could be done as a simple vote in Parliament.
But it did have the upside of that sort of mass demonstration of support.
And seeing all the live footage of the people, the live reactions in you know, public spaces all around the country was wonderful.
That was wonderful to think that, you know, basically 65% of Australians were solidly behind you.
So,
and, you know, your whole struggle in your life as a gay person is, do I belong? And to have 65% of people say, yeah, you do absolutely belong, is a powerful thing.
It is. It very much is. And I think that's why when we met with you in our initial interview as research for this project, we realised there was just so much more to maybe than what we had read in newspapers or knew it sort of within our family or work circles, that we felt that this is a longer form article. These are interesting stories that need to be told on the story map and then ultimately a podcast. So we really appreciate you participating in this podcast and really telling us from your point of view what that campaign was like, because it does seem like there was a lot of ups and downs, but ultimately it was a great victory for the whole community, the whole electorate. And one of the great things that has come out of that is that although Tweed Shire has become sort of a marriage destination anyways, a lot of LGBTQIA people have decided to get married here. Some of which, 2 couples of which actually got married shortly after the law was changed. And we talk about them in the story map. So I just wanted to know what you thought about that.
I guess the energy goes to making it happen, and then you're so tired from the site you don't think a lot after that. But look, the Tweed's just a beautiful place to do anything, really, isn't it?
Yes.
And if it is a place where people can come and get married, and if it's a place where gay and lesbian people and other people can come and get married, bring it on.
I just wondered if maybe that above average vote signaled something.
Yeah. But what I think is also interesting is that there wasn't a sort of tidal wave of gay people getting married.
True.
It was to have the right and then to think about whether it works for you.
Right.
And in a way, we're just beginning to see some of our friends now, years later, getting married. So it was the ability to have that space to make that decision about whether it worked for you.
Right.
It may not work for some people, it may work for people over time. So that's what's been really the interesting things.
Your question is interesting though. I wonder, people who have come, gay and lesbian people who have come here to get married, I wonder what, from outside of the area, I wonder what their perception is and whether they've investigated whether the outcome of the vote.
I do wonder about that because as you know, there are lots of gay tourism operators and sites, and there are websites you can go and check to sort of find out if maybe a location is gay friendly or this business, you know, is a safe place to host an event if there's going to be gay people present. I know in the story map we showcase some of the wonderful gay friendly and gay operated businesses that have existed a long time in Murwillumbah. So I just thought maybe the above average vote maybe also signalled something to people in the community who are sometimes used to naturally checking, is this going to be a good destination for me to visit or to move to?
But what I think
This
is
is a
interesting is
supportive
that just not so much even the gay-friendly businesses, but just the ordinary businesses
Right,
where it now is just part of their business. You can go to the newsagent here in Murwillumbah, and in the wedding section there are her and his cards. I never thought I would see that in just an ordinary, everyday country newsagent, and it's theirs. And that's actually the most rewarding thing, to see that it's just part of everyday life in our town now. People don't give it a second thought.
And it also signals that there has been a long history here, as we've established in our research. Just going back to the early 1900s, I mean, there's probably a history far beyond that we haven't quite reached. But I did want to ask you, you are now part of Tweed history for your involvement in the successful Yes campaign. Why is it important to you both to collect and preserve local, regional queer history?
Coming to accept that you are gay, queer, is always a journey of self-discovery, I think even now for young people. But when I was growing up in a small town, there were no external reference points. You didn't even know what it was. You didn't even know, you couldn't explain it, other than you would hear terrible derogatory statements in ordinary everyday conversation. But there was no positive external reference point. Like, thank God for number 96, because that was the first time I saw it on television, and I could instantly recognise what it was. That was the first sort of explanation. And so I think if you grow up in a country town, even today in today's media, to have it, to have that external reference point, to be able to see, during the marriage equality campaign, the rainbow flag outside the council chamber. You come on a school excursion to this museum to see that fantastic cabinet that you've got out there saying small town queer, to see the little small town queer signs at the cinema. Those things just give you little messages that this can be okay. And so I think that's why it's important to preserve that. And it also recognises people who had a lot of courage to live to live underground, as it were, and to form their own social networks and survive. Those people had a lot of courage to do that, and they need to be recognised for that courage.
I think sometimes, collecting history can just be, it can just be fun. And the things, you come into a museum, or usually a museum, and there is this fantastically gathered history, and you discover how people did live and how hard it might have been or how different it might have been, but it is how people were. In some ways reflects how we are today, and that it reminds us. And I think, like Peter says, it's great for people coming in to feel okay with what they see. It can shift people's thinking about things, it can enlighten people, or it can just be fun to see. I come in here and see that, and there's a lot of having been a part of some of that is a reflection, but I look at other people's lives and think, wow, look how they have achieved this, or look what that story was. Yeah. And I hope it continues.
Like, we're sitting in this room and behind you is a wall full of white photographs of white men. But now you step outside this room into the museum, there's a fantastic gallery now about the Indigenous story in this valley. It just reflects the people who live here. And what better thing could you do in a museum than actually reflect all the people who bring value to the community in which you live? Those old white men up there, they did bring value, but it's a very narrow story when it's just them hanging on the wall.
Definitely, and I think that's why we chose this methodology of queering the museum, looking at our collection through a queer lens, and we will be discussing this in a later podcast. And also just getting out there and talking to people, because it is a very diverse community, both internationally, nationally, but especially locally too. And I mean that in terms of the whole Tweed community, but also within the queer community. Often I think people see us as a monolith.
Yeah.
And as you will know from being part of that community, but maybe for others who are not, who will read the stories within the exhibition, It is a very diverse community. People have chosen to move here for all kinds of reasons, maybe similar to some people who aren't part of the queer community, but they've been able to express themselves in a unique way. And I think that's history making and very much worthy of being within the museum now and into the future. So thank you very much, both of you, for participating in Small Town Queer. It very much is the start of collecting in this area, and we're really grateful for your contribution. And for the listeners who may have the opportunity to visit the museum, we do, as Peter referred to, have a small display case in our lobby at the moment, which actually has the shirts and a pin that you wore during the marriage equality campaign that you've both kindly donated to the collection, because we are looking to collect objects as part of our collection, which we hope will become a larger physical exhibition in the future. So thank you very much.
And I think also we would like to say that you call out the courage that you and the museum have shown in putting this whole thing together. It's a fantastic thing for a small regional museum to do. It says a lot about how far we've come.
Definitely.
So thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Small Town Queer podcast. To hear more Small Town Queer stories, subscribe to the series and like, share and review this episode. And check out the Small Town Queer playlist on Spotify, curated by museum staff and project participants. For more information about Small Town Queer, visit museum.tweed.newsouthwales.gov.au/small-town-queer. Tweed Regional Museum is supported by the New South Wales Government through Create Funding New South Wales. This project would not have been possible without the support and collaboration of the people of Tweed, who have generously shared their lived experiences, archives and objects with this project.